Tech and clips.
Yeah. Welcome back to the channel, guys. Name is Philip. You guys already know that. This is Philiminizzy Reacts. Yes, on this channel we do music reactions to your favorite songs, to your favorite bands, to your favorite artists. And if this is the kind of content you're very much interested in, you know what to do. Smash the like button, subscribe to the channel, join the family. It's all love, no negativity helping. Yes. Today, we're back with another reaction. Yes, certainly not a music reaction. Yes, today we are going to check out a brief history of Pink Floyd. Yes, you guys know I've been doing this history thing. We've done Queen, we've done Beatles. Yes, I think today we are doing Pink Floyd. Yes, you guys already know I've been listening to Pink Floyd, their music, and it has grown on me. It has grown on me. But I don't really know much about them. The only thing I know about them is, David, the band members. Yes, David Gilmour, Roger Waters, Richard Wright. I don't know, much about them. How their journey, their music journey, how they came together to form this band. So yeah, once again, shout outs to The Beat Goes On. This channel, keeps putting these little documentaries on the channel for us to check out. So shout outs to The Beat Goes On. Once again, I'll leave a link down the description so you go check the channel out. Yes. So yeah, a brief history of Pink Floyd. Super excited, super stoked, super anxious to find out their journey, all that they've been through over the years. You guys let me know they've been doing music from like the 60s, which is like a big deal. So yeah, without wasting much time, without further ado, brief history of Pink Floyd. So to all my Pink Floyd fans, gather here. Let's watch and react to this together. Let's go.
London, 1963. Roger Waters and Nick Mason meet while studying architecture at what is now known as the University of Westminster. Eventually, they both joined a band called Sigma 6, although at one point the band was called the Megadeths, and they eventually settled on...
It's amazing how these rock bands, like most of them started off in school. They were in universities and then pursuing, like programs, high top-notch programs, and then they eventually, drift into music. It's amazing. When you take Queen, Brian May was studying this physics something, but I mean, they all met in school, university, in college, so it's amazing. It's amazing. Yes.
On the name The Tea Set. Waters played lead guitar and Mason played drums. There was also Keith Noble, Clive Metcalf, and another fellow architecture student named Richard Wright who played keyboard. For lack of a better word, The Tea Set was a standard rock band that specialized in R&B covers. However, soon Noble and Metcalf left the band and others took their place. There was Bob Close, who played lead guitar after Waters shifted to bass guitar. Close introduced Waters to Chris Dennis, who became their new lead singer. Meanwhile, Syd Barrett, a childhood friend of Waters, also joined up with them playing guitar. In December 1964, they recorded for the first time at a studio that one of Wright's friends let them use. In early 1965, the Royal Air Force assigned Dennis to Bahrain. So Barrett stepped in to become the band's new lead singer. A few months later, they became the resident band at the Countdown Club in London. Each night into the wee hours, they played 3 90-minute sets. This was when their songs got longer with more solos, and they, dare I say, got more experimental with their sound. In the summer, after pressure from his parents and teachers, Close quit the band to focus on his studies, and Barrett also took over lead guitar. After going through various more name changes, by the end of 1965, the four of them, Syd Barrett, Nick Mason, Roger Waters, and Richard Wright, were now billing themselves Pink Floyd. The name came from...
Well, this is definitely talking about, humble beginnings, like, I mean, for a band that's just coming up. Like they really did a lot of changes. Like it's just crazy. Okay, so now we have Pink Floyd. This is Nick Mason, Roger Waters, Richard Wright, and then this Sid. Sid. Well, I can see. Yes. Let's continue.
The combined names of two American blues musicians Barrett loved, Pink Anderson and Floyd Council. Pink Floyd played lots of gigs throughout 1966 and even started to get paid for them.
Okay.
Led by Barrett, their sound was a weird mix of rock, blues, and even music hall. Ultimately, their sound distinctly became known as psychedelic. Meaning music influenced by psychedelic drugs, hallucinogenic drugs that created weird states of consciousness. Barrett, in particular, became a regular user of LSD, and that heavily influenced the band's music. The author Lewis Carroll also heavily influenced Barrett's lyrics. Anyway, at one point in 1966, a dude named Andrew King and another dude named Peter Jenner saw Pink Floyd perform at the Marquee Club, and they were blown away. They soon asked the band to become their managers, and the band agreed. With Jenner and King's help, Pink Floyd got better shows, and they got them a booking agent named Brian Morrison, who managed a venue they played a lot at called the UFO Club. Not all of their shows were, well received. Because they were playing more and more of Barrett's experimental songs instead of R&B covers, audiences sometimes didn't know how to respond. After playing one show at a Catholic youth club, for example, the owner refused to pay them, saying the performance wasn't music. King and Jenner sued, but actually lost the lawsuit, believe it or not. But by the end of the year, Pink Floyd had built a solid fan base and soon attracted the attention of record labels. Morrison and a local club manager named Joe Boyd got the band a recording session at Sound Techniques in London. Soon after that, EMI signed the band, giving them a £5,000 advance, which is nearly £100,000 in today's money. EMI Columbia released Pink Floyd's first single, Arnold Lane, on March 10th, 1967. The song is about a man who steals women's clothes and underwear from clotheslines to wear them. Despite the subject of the song being taboo, and despite several radio stations banning it, it was a hit in the United Kingdom. The band even filmed a music video for it.
Man, I think I have to listen to that song, because I mean, like, who steals a woman's clothes and underwears and wears them? Like, it doesn't make sense. Like, I mean, for this song to be a hit in the United Kingdom, like, this must really be a big deal. Definitely have noted the song down. Definitely take a listen. After this. So yeah, let's go.
And it's amazing, creepy, but amazing. In May, Pink Floyd appeared on the BBC's Look of the Week, and I'm sorry, I first just got to play what the host, Hans Keller, had to say about them on it.
To my mind, there is continuous repetition, and proportionately they are a bit boring. My second point is that they are terribly loud. Why has it all got to be so terribly loud?
I gotta say, the responses to Keller's rude questions were delightful.
Well, I don't guess it has to be, but I mean, that's the way we like it. And we didn't grow up with a string quartet, and I guess that could be one of the reasons why it is loud. And it doesn't sound terribly loud to us.
EMI Columbia released the band's second single, See Emily Play, on June 16th, and it was an even bigger hit. They performed the song on the BBC's Top of the Pops and came back on the show 2 more times in the coming months. Even though they hated to mind their singing and playing, meanwhile, Pink Floyd had been recording their first full-length studio album at EMI Studios in London with producer Norman Smith. During its recording, Barrett had started taking LSD much more frequently, and the rest of the band noticed it made him disconnected. Regardless, recording wrapped up quickly, and EMI Columbia released their debut album called The Piper at the Gates of Dawn on August 5th, 1967. The album was a commercial success, and critics adored it. The biggest hit off of it, at least at the time, was Flaming, although the album also featured the live favorite, Interstellar Overdrive. Capitol Records would release their first several albums in the United States. The band played many shows to promote it in Europe, but had to cancel their shows scheduled in the United States due to Barrett apparently having a mental breakdown, probably due to overusing drugs. After canceling their appearance at the National Jazz and Blues Festival, King told the press that Barrett was suffering from, quote, nervous exhaustion. King and Barrett's bandmates tried to get him help from doctors, but Barrett didn't respond well to it. Whenever they did play shows with Barrett in the fall of 1967, he sometimes played with the band okay, and sometimes stared off into space, or even played with his back to the crowd, playing one note over and over. Even on American national TV, like the band's appearance on American Bandstand on November 7th, 1967, Barrett seemed barely there. This was embarrassing to the band, and King ended their American tour soon after that. Back in the UK, the band played a few shows with the Jimi Hendrix, but things got no better with Barrett, and the band agreed to add guitarist David Gilmour as a fifth member. Gilmour...
Okay, whoa. All along, I was going to ask where David Gilmour, fit in. At the time, he wasn't part of the band. So, I mean, he just from what I'm listening to right now and watching, he was added as a fifth member. Okay.
Actually was a longtime friend of Barrett's, and the idea was that Gilmour would perform live with the band since Barrett couldn't. By January 1968, it was clear that Barrett was suffering from depression and probably schizophrenia. Once joyful and extroverted, now he just wandered around and didn't talk to anyone much. It was like he was a completely different person. His bandmates couldn't handle it anymore. Originally, Barrett was to stay with the band, to just write songs with them and not perform. But even that was not working out. When Pink Floyd recorded what would become their second album, Barrett did contribute one song that made the cut, Jug Band Blues. The song, I think, is a masterpiece and seems pretty self-aware that the band was phasing Barrett out. And the band had a really difficult time letting Sid go. But by April, he was no longer in the band. Within 4 years, Sid Barrett had left the music industry, retired from public life, and lived the rest of his life in obscurity, which probably only increased his legendary status, to be honest. Incredibly, Pink Floyd's most successful and creative years had yet to come. They hired a new manager, Steve O'Rourke. EMI Columbia released the aforementioned second studio album, A Saucer Full of Secrets, on June 29th, 1968. It featured the single Let There Be More Light, and it got all the way up to number 9 on the UK album chart. A Saucer Full of Secrets was the first Pink Floyd album to feature Gilmour, and the only one in which all Pink Floyd members appeared on. The sound definitely was still psychedelic, with elements of a new subgenre that the band helped invent called space rock. The day after the album's release, the band played a free concert in Hyde Park. They soon returned to the United States with The Who for their first big tour there the next few months. On December 17th, 1968, Pink Floyd released the single Point Me at the Sky. In early 1969, the band returned to the studio to record their third studio album and first soundtrack album for the film More. EMI Columbia released it on June 13th, 1969. It received mixed reviews, but still got a lot of radio airplay in the UK. Not wasting any time, the band also recorded their fourth studio album that year, Ummagumma, also maybe pronounced Ummagumma, released by Harvest Records on November 7th. Ummagumma was unique in that it was a double album, with the first half featuring live recordings from shows at Mother's Club in Birmingham and the College of Commerce in Manchester from the spring of 1969, and the second half featuring a single experimental take from each band member. It was the band's most ambitious album up to that point, and a bit risky, but fans and critics mostly dug it anyway. Anyway, it spent 21 weeks on the UK album chart. After recording some songs for the Zabriskie Point soundtrack, the band spent much of 1970 recording what would become their 5th studio album, Adam Heart Mother, which Harvest released on October 2nd. This would be the last Pink Floyd album Norman Smith helped out with, and the band worked closely with composer Ron Geeson to help them record, as well as conductor John Aldous, who actually led a choir to perform on the record. Both Waters and Gilmour later said Adam Heart Mother was, not a good album. In fact, Stanley Kubrick wanted to use the album's title track in his film, A Clockwork Orange, but it didn't work out, and later Waters said, quote, maybe it's just as well it wasn't used after all. Despite all that, Adam Heart Mother became the band's first #1 album on the UK chart. It also did well on American radio stations. To promote the album, Pink Floyd toured a bunch across both Europe and the United States. By 1971, the band was finally making a profit. Yep, believe it or not, up to that point, they were scraping by. That year, Mason and Wright settled down and became fathers, buying homes in London. Gilmour, who was still single, moved to an old farm in Essex. Waters built a home recording studio out of a converted tool shed at his house in Islington. Perhaps not trusting his old tool shed, the band returned to Abbey Road Studios in London to record some new material. I'd argue that this is when Pink Floyd had fully developed their distinct sound that most people identify and recognize with them today. Waters in particular took more control of their sound, especially with the lyrics. Still, by this point, Gilmour was contributing just as much with the overall songwriting. It was even more experimental than anything they had worked on up to that point. One crazy thing they did to mix things up in the studio involved each band member playing on a separate track with no reference to what the other bandmates were doing. Each member played around an agreed chord structure, but the tempo was completely random. All of this experimentation led to what became their 6th studio album, Metal, released by Harvest on October 30th, 1971. Critics adored its ambition, and it did well in the UK. But it initially didn't sell well in the United States, probably due to poor marketing there. Still, with Metal, Pink Floyd had taken progressive rock to the next level, especially with the album's epic song Echoes, which clocks in at over 23 minutes. To promote the album, the band toured the UK, United States, and Japan. In early 1972, the band recorded what would become their 7th studio album, Obscured by...
Man, like, wow. Like, within the space of, like, a decade, like, 7 albums. It's just, wow. Like, I'm thinking, like, I have a long way to go. Like, a ton of music to listen to. So, I mean, all the songs that I have listened to on the channel is like, it's like their later works, like their later projects. You know, like, I feel like I have to really go down, you know, take it down to the essence, you know, like to their first album, you know, listen to a few songs, you know, to see the progression, you know, the you know, this band revolving, you know, in terms of their sound, in terms of their, like, in terms of everything that makes this band. Wow, I'm impressed. Like, within a short time space, like 7 albums. That's just okay. This one is Obscured by Clouds. Wow.
By Clouds, which became the soundtrack for a French film of the same name. Harvest released it on June 2nd, 1972, and it featured the single Free 4, which sounds happy, but has quite depressing lyrics. Obscured by Clouds would soon be overshadowed by a much greater album, however. This one would be a concept album unified by one theme.
Please don't tell me this is the dark side of the moon. Please don't tell me. Please.
Theme being the various stages of life. More specifically, the themes of conflict, greed, time, death, and mental illness. Waters made early demo tracks of it at his Toolshed studio, and based on that, the rest of the band wrote and produced new material at Abbey Road Studios from May 1972 until January 1973. The legendary Alan Parsons engineered it using using some pretty fancy studio techniques such as tape loops, and the band used synthesizer sounds likely never recorded before.
Okay.
Also with these recordings, Wright and Gilmour had mastered harmonizing their voices.
Wow.
Harvest and Capitol Records released their 8th studio album, The Dark Side of the Moon.
I said it. Wow. Wow, this album is just something else, you know. I think yesterday we did a reaction on Us and Them, and that song is just. I mean, like I think we've done two songs off this album, Time, and then 2 or 3. I'm not too sure, but Time. I remember Time, and then Us and Them. This album is just a classic. Honestly, I've not listened to all of the songs on it, but like, man.
On March 1st, 1973. Then and now, almost everyone agrees that it's a perfect album and is generally considered the band's masterpiece.
Yeah.
In fact, many critics consider The Dark Side of the Moon one of the greatest, if not the greatest albums of all time. It only held the #1 spot on the Billboard 200 chart 1 week, but it stayed on that chart for 736 weeks. On and off, all the way up to 1988. And
That's a
yes,
long time.
it eventually became Pink Floyd's most commercially successful album and has sold an estimated 46 million copies worldwide, making it possibly the 3rd most commercially successful
Album of all
album
time.
ever
Wow,
created.
that's a big achievement.
Whoa-ness. Obviously, this was the album that turned Pink Floyd into superstars and brought them great wealth. While it produced 2 hit singles, Money and Us and Them, the
Yes.
album was meant to be played as an album, and it was. And it still is. The band toured Europe, the United States, Australia, and Japan in 1973 to promote the album, but they really didn't have to. Due to its success, they began to sell out stadiums, and the audience now was dancing and going crazy. To recreate The Dark Side of the Moon live, the band added saxophonist Dick Parry and female backing singers to each show. After touring in France and the UK in 1974, the band returned to Abbey Road Studios to record new stuff. Waters also wanted their next album to have a conceptual theme about alienation, both with relationships and the music industry. Waters wrote a song called Shine On You Crazy Diamond as a tribute to Syd Barrett, who now hadn't been in the band for 7 years. Coincidentally, when the band was completing recording of the song on June 5th, 1975, Barrett randomly showed up to the studio to visit them. At this point, he was overweight with a completely shaved head and shaven eyebrows. Because of this, when he first entered the studio, nobody recognized him.
Yes.
However, once they realized who he was, many began weeping. They played Shine On You Crazy Diamond for him, but apparently he couldn't realize the song was about him. Barrett didn't say much while he was there, and he snuck out without saying goodbye. Except for Waters seeing him at the store a couple years later, this would be the last time the band ever saw Barrett alive. Pink Floyd wrapped up recording the next month, and on September 12th, 1975, Harvest released their 9th studio album, Wish You Were Here. By this point, the band had dropped Capitol Records in the United States, and Columbia released it there. While that album got radio airplay with songs like the title track, Have a Cigar, and Welcome to the Machine, critics were a bit more harsh about the album, saying it was a bit pretentious and self-indulgent. That said, today most critics argue Wish You Were Here is one of their best albums, and both Wright and Gilmour used to say it was their favorite Pink Floyd album. While it couldn't match the success of The Dark Side of the Moon, it still eventually sold over 20 million copies. They continued to tour to promote the album. Meanwhile, the band bought some church halls in Islington and converted them into a big recording studio featuring, wait for it, 24 tracks. That's where they would record what would become their 10th studio album, Animals, which would be released by Harvest and Columbia on January 23rd, 1977. It was another concept album, of course, but this time it focused on the social and political conditions of the UK at the time. During its recording, the band started doing something they hadn't done much before: fighting. There was conflict, mostly due to arguments over, you guessed it, money. the division of royalties specifically. While all members still contributed to creating new songs, Waters took much greater control on Animals. The album was another commercial success, peaking at number 2 on the UK album charts and number 3 on the Billboard 200. As the band toured huge stadiums in Europe and the United States to promote Animals, they grew increasingly frustrated with audience members who were disruptive. Waters in particular had an incident at a show in Montreal in which an angry fan confronted him for not playing an encore, and he spat in the fan's face.
Whoa,
This experience later influenced Waters to write new music that would become their next album, The Wall. Waters spent much of 1978 writing this album, and Bob Ezrin came in to help produce, actually writing a 40-page script for it based on Waters' fictional character of Pink, a depressed rock star who reflects on how he got to that point in his life. The Wall would be a rock opera that examined both abandonment and isolation, symbolized by, well, you know, a wall. Pink Floyd spent almost a year recording it, beginning in December 1978 and not wrapping things up until the following November. However, Wright, who was going through some rough personal issues himself, had stopped showing up to recording sessions. When he did show up, he apparently didn't do much. Due to this, the rest of the band reluctantly agreed that they would have to kick him out of the band. And Wright agreed to quietly leave shortly before the new album's release. That said, most fans didn't even notice, as Wright still stuck around as a salaried session musician who still also played live with Pink Floyd. Harvest and Columbia released The Wall, which was their 11th studio album, on November 30th, 1979. The band admittedly rushed to release it since they were going through some financial troubles. Fortunately for them, it was a huge hit. In fact, it eventually became their second best-selling album of all time, only behind The Dark Side of the Moon. With over 30 million copies sold, it's actually the best-selling double album of all time. The Wall featured 3 singles that all became huge radio hits: Another Brick in the Wall Part 2, Run Like Hell, and Comfortably Numb. Critics adored it, and it's also listed today as one of the greatest albums of all time. For the next year and a half, the band supported The Wall with an epic tour where they played the whole album from beginning to end, and they featured big inflatable puppets on stage to represent different characters from the storyline. Later, the band helped the director Alan Parker adapt the album into a film. First released in 1982, Pink Floyd The Wall received mostly positive reviews and has since had a cult following. Meanwhile, tensions had continued to grow within the band, and overall, they had drifted apart. Waters and Gilmour had fought over what material to include for the aforementioned The Wall film. Not only that, Waters now wanted to make new music all by himself without much input from the rest of the band. While the band struggled to move forward, Harvest and Columbia released a greatest hits album called A Collection of Great Dance Songs. Throughout 1982, Waters grew impatient with Gilmour, who promised new material but failed to deliver, doing solo stuff instead. Waters decided he would just write a new Pink Floyd album himself. Gilmour didn't hide the fact that he didn't like many of the new tracks, but Waters moved forward with them anyway. The final result was the band's 12th studio album, The Final Cut, released by Harvest and Columbia on March 21st, 1983. The Final Cut ended up being quite an appropriate title of the album, as it was the last to feature Roger Waters. Featuring the single Not Now John with its F-bombs and all, the album received mixed reviews and was their worst performing album since Obscured by Clouds. On June 18th, 1983, Capitol released a compilation of mostly unreleased songs by the band called Works. In 1984, their longtime manager, Steve O'Rourke, called for the band to meet for dinner to discuss Pink Floyd's future. By this point, both Waters and Gilmour had had flourishing solo careers. Well, Gilmour and Mason left the dinner thinking the band still had a future. Waters apparently left the dinner thinking the band was done. Regardless, a few months later, later, Roger Waters had officially left the band, but Gilmour decided to keep the band going, bringing back Wright on keyboard, and determined to make a new Pink Floyd album, as difficult as it would be without Waters. And yes, there would be legal fights between Waters and Gilmour over the Pink Floyd name, but Gilmour ended up winning those fights. The band brought back Bob Ezrin to help produce, and they recorded at various studios in late 1986 and early 1987. The results ended up being their 13th studio album, A Momentary Lapse of Reason, released by EMI and Columbia on September 7th, 1987. It featured 3 singles that all got regular radio airplay: Learning to Fly, On the Turning Away, and One Slip. A Momentary Lapse of Reason received mixed reviews, and the band went on an 11-week tour to promote it that featured incredible special effects. In August 1988, Pink Floyd recorded live performances at the Nassau Coliseum on Long Island, New York, over a period of 5 different nights, and they turned that into an album called Delicate Sound of Thunder, released by EMI and Columbia on November 22nd. For the next few years, the band pursued their own personal projects. Meanwhile, EMI and Columbia released a 9-CD box set by the band on November 24th, 1992, that coincided with the band's 25th anniversary, at least as a recording and touring band anyway. Finally, in 1993, the band returned to various studios to record new stuff. In reality, it mostly was just Gilmour and Wright. Ezrin once again returned to produce. The new songs ended up making up their 14th studio album, The Division Bell, released by EMI in Columbia on March 28th, 1994. While the album again received mixed reviews and didn't have any major radio hits, it still managed to sell more than 7 million copies. Pink Floyd went on another major tour to promote The Division Bell, with bigger special effects than ever before. A live album called Pulse and live film, also called Pulse, later documented several shows on it. On September 19th, 1995, the band released an EP and another film, both called London 66 to 67, featuring previously unreleased songs. At this point, however, the band was pretty much done, whether they knew it at the time or not. On January 17th, 1996, Pink Floyd was inducted into the United States Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. However, only Gilmour, Wright, and Mason showed up to accept it. It's no surprise that Barrett didn't make it, but sadly, not even Waters showed up. For the next 9 years, the bands went on a big hiatus, and then Waters did show up. He reunited with the band as they performed at the Live 8 concerts in Hyde Park. Obviously, the fans there went crazy. Afterward, Pink Floyd was offered £136 million for a final tour, but they turned it down. The Hyde Park show would be the last Pink Floyd concert. Though all 4 did take part in a Syd Barrett tribute concert in 2007. Barrett died of pancreatic cancer the previous year. Wright would die from lung cancer the following year. But amazingly, Pink Floyd wasn't done in the studio. Well, at least not Gilmour and Wright. In 2013, the two decided to revisit the unused Division Bell recordings and fix them up and add to them. The result was the band's 15th album, The Endless River, released by Parlophone Records on November 7th, 2014. It would be their final album, although it's worth noting they released several compilation albums over the past 25 years. Today, Pink Floyd remains one of the most successful and influential rock bands of all time. They've sold more than 250 million records worldwide. They are easily the most prominent progressive rock band to ever exist. Afterward, Pink Floyd was offered £136 million for a final tour, but they turned it down. The Hyde Park show would be the last Pink Floyd concert. Though all 4 did take part in a Syd Barrett tribute concert in 2007. Barrett died of pancreatic cancer the previous year. Wright would die from lung cancer the following year. But amazingly, Pink Floyd wasn't done in the studio. Well, at least not Gilmour and Wright. it. In 2013, the two decided to revisit the unused Division Bell recordings and fix them up and add to them. The result was the band's 15th album, The Endless River, released by Parlophone Records on November 7th, 2014. It would be their final album, although it's worth noting they released several compilation albums over the past 25 years. Today, Pink Floyd remains one of the most successful and influential rock bands of all time. They've sold more than 250 million records worldwide. They are easily the most prominent progressive rock band to ever exist, known for their long and complex songs, extreme sonic experimentation, visually stimulating live performances, and deep lyrics. They played a tremendous role popularizing the concept album and just stretching the boundaries of what makes a song, a song. They began modestly as a blues band playing mostly R&B covers, but they ended epically as a band that was responsible for much of the future of all music.
Wow. 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 Okay. Sorry. So yeah, ladies and gentlemen, that was a brief history of the band Pink Floyd. Yes, before I say anything, once again, shout outs to The Beat Goes On. Like I said, this channel, put together this documentary, and personally, I feel it is very informative. Like I said, I've been listening to their music, on the channel, for a while now. It has grown on me. I always say, their sound is very unique, very it's an experience, listening to this band. And I mean, like I didn't really know much about them, but I mean, today having to watch this documentary and all the information that came out of it, I'm like, wow. I mean, for a band that has been making music since the 60s, 15 albums, 250 million copies sold worldwide, it's just a big deal. They've done it all. I feel like this band, has had a very successful career. Obviously they had ups and downs. Right down from, the ups and downs, the fall offs. Band members leaving and stuff like that. I mean, I want to congratulate David Gilmour. Even when it seemed like the band was done, I mean, he kept the band going. And wow. For a band that make concept albums, it's crazy. But yeah, I enjoyed this. I enjoyed this documentary. Like I said, I feel like it's very informative, and I've been able to pick a few information, obviously, from it. So yeah, you guys, let me know down in the comment section how accurate this documentary is. If you feel it's accurate, please let me know down in the comment. If not, let me know down in the comment section the loopholes that you feel that was left out. It would be very much appreciated. But yeah, all the same, like I said, I enjoyed it. It was very informative. So yeah, let me know your perspective. Let me know your thoughts about this documentary, and down in the comment section. And like I said, I just have to go back, to the essence, listening to Pink Floyd, from right down from their first album, till now. It's gonna be a hell of a ride. I can tell you that. Yes, but I'm all in for it. So yeah, let me know where you think we can start. I mean, we've already done reactions, to them already, but I want to start from the essence. So please comment down below. Let me know the appropriate song you think we can start off, from their first album, right down to their 15th album. Do that in the comment section. And yes, don't forget to introduce the channel, to new bands, new songs, new artists, and we will definitely listen to it whenever the time is right. Yes, so I hope you enjoyed this. If you liked, please give me a like, and comment, share with your friends, your family, let them know what we do on here. Yes. So yeah, Merry Christmas in advance, Happy New Year in advance. On to the next music reaction. Take care, stay safe, and then peace out.